Hello. Welcome to Season XV of the Horrific Podcast. We're two friends who live in different places but share a love for scary movies. In each episode, we both watch the same movie on our own and then record a conversation together about what we liked, what we hated, if we were scared, and maybe even some larger truths about why people watch horror movies in the first place. This season, we're watching movies from the 90s and talking about how they fit into the larger picture of 90s horror and how each year from that decade stacks up against the others. Thanks for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the episode. So, the theme of the rest of this season, which started off as a journey through the 90s to find movies that weren't sequels or remakes or super successful at the box office. We've also been maintaining this list of rankings of how the years stack up against each other. But we realized it really wasn't super fair because we have only reviewed a couple of movies, like the ones we did for this season for certain years of the 90s. But we were taking into account movies that we reviewed in previous seasons. So the next couple of weeks are just going to be us balancing things out a little bit so that those comparisons are a little bit more even.
And this is the reason why the Horrific should be your best friend, because no matter what, Daniel and I will always do our best to make sure that we make up an excuse of why you're not so bad. For example, one of the years may have been terrible, but we're going to try to make up for it. So say you come to us with a problem and you're like, hey, I hit this person and I shouldn't have. We would just spend time explaining why it would be okay for you to do that. Because we don't want you guys to feel bad. And we don't want these seasons to feel bad. Years to feel bad. It sounded better in my head before I said it.
I mean, every cloud has a silver lining, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you just need a little help pointing that out.
Yeah. We're the most pessimistic, optimistic people out there.
Yeah, it's our lane. We stay in it. So this week we've gotten in 1998's lane. Because we had only covered 3 movies from that year. And we're trying to get everybody up to, at least 3 or 4. But one of the ones from 98 was Deep Rising. Which wasn't much of a movie. And then also Dark City, which was good. I mean, I enjoyed it, but it also wasn't as much horror, I think, as it was kind of sci-fi. Like, we found some horror elements and stuff, but I felt like 98 just didn't really stack up on this list initially, kind of on its own. And
it was also the year that had like the most sequels too.
There was definitely a resurgence of ones that we couldn't talk about. So we decided to come back and give it one more chance, a saving throw, if you will, with the movie Blade. Wesley Snipes at his finest. I feel like if 1998 had to put one foot forward, this would be the foot it would choose.
You're damn right it would be. I almost texted you 1,000 times when I was watching this saying, I can't believe we're watching Blade for our podcast. This is the greatest day of my life.
Do what you love. You never work a day in your life.
And that's watching Blade on DVD.
How many copies of this movie on DVD do you have?
4. 3 of them were all scratched. And guess how many I tried to watch before I realized I had 4.
I know you better than you know yourself sometimes.
Oh, well, I mean, shit, you go to Hastings, back in early 2000s, you get that movie for pretty cheap use, so you have to get it. It's just science. This is how math works in my head.
Yeah.
I mean, it's $3, but I don't know if I ever need to give it as a gift.
Is that $3 better spent on whatever random thing I wasted on or on my 6th copy of the Blade DVD so that when the first 5 get scratched, I can still watch it at a time and place of my choosing?
Exactly. Now, I knew I had more, which is why I didn't rent it, because you can't, I wasn't able to stream it. And so, like, I knew I had more, which is why I was like, yep, I'm not going to pay more to rent this than I paid
$350 to rent it.
Well, so, if it was on, that's true. If it was on, if it was on Prime, it was probably on discount or something, because they're trying to get people to use their app because they put commercials in their stuff that you pay for. But
it's obnoxious.
Yeah, it's insane. But that's neither here nor there. But that was the specific reason I was like, I know for a fact I paid less for these DVDs than what they're trying to make me rent this for. I can't do it. A lot of times my math is, how much would I pay to not have to deal with this situation? And you'd be surprised on how much I'd be willing to pay to not deal with certain situations. This was not one of them.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad it worked out for you in the end.
Yeah, it was good.
Some good ROI there is what that is.
Yep.
So yeah, we're going to go through this just as if we are doing an extra week of a deep dive on 1998. And I'm excited to talk about it with you because I know this is a movie you really like. I think this one has tons of connection points to other 90s movies, and then also some interesting vampire stuff to talk about. So we're going to get into all of that. But first, I'm going to do a quick introduction, and then we will dig in. No, sorry. Shit. Then we will bite into the ancient magic is one thing, but everyone knows anti-blood clotting medication is undefeated across time and space. Details.
Love it.
In 1998, New Line Cinema brought us Blade, a dark superhero story adapted from a comic book of the same name. In this movie, Wesley Snipes plays the titular character who is a half-human, half-vampire who has made it his life's mission to kill as many vampires as possible. Spoiler warning, it's a lot. Helped out by old and new friends, Blade must rush to uncover a mysterious vampire plot and stop the person behind it. This movie was made on a budget of $45 million and made over $130 million at the box office. It has 2 sequels, and all 3 movies can be rented for streaming on Amazon Prime Video.
Or you just come to my house, I'll let you borrow a copy.
At some point, you're going to start your own old school Netflix.
No, hell no, I ain't. Hell no, I ain't, man. No one. I'll let my friends borrow it. That's it.
Okay, fair.
And you know what you're getting? The barely playable, scratchable ones, which is all of them. It's all.
That's actually why I thought you could start your own legacy Netflix competitor. But anyway, yeah. So this is the first time I saw this movie not on cable.
Oh yeah.
And it was also the first time I've seen it in many, many years. Yeah. So did you want to take a moment just to explain some of your favorite things about this one before we get into more of the horror stuff?
Ooh, that's interesting. Well, listen, this is a 90s movie inside and out.
Yes.
Okay. You have Dope Car that has that. I like movies that I think I tend to like movies like this that have like they have a specialty. So like they have a special vehicle. I don't want to say superhero movies, but yeah, it kind of goes to that. But I like the customization that you can have with characters, and this one has a ton. So Blade has a ton of cool weapons. He has a ton of cool martial arts moves. So that's cool in itself. Wesley Snipes, like you said earlier, at his best, in my opinion, he was made for this role. It has Whistler in it. I literally just drew a blank on his actual name, which is sad because he's damn. It has Chris Christopherson as Whistler in it, which Chris Christopherson was an amazing songwriter, musician. I don't know. I'm just kidding, but a fantastic actor, in my opinion, too. You got to see Blade just straight up shredding people. There were like 90s like action movie things that are said, like when someone's murdered or someone's killed or like they're stopped, and it's like, or like they get to the chopper type comments. It's just like I like the action from those, but it was just a perfect combo of action horror, in my opinion. It was a little less scary because you have this guy who can obviously fight and destroy, and they have the tools that they need to destroy a lot of these vampires. But yeah, I mean, it was just that it was just a perfect combo. And I probably watched this in 98 too, which would have made me like 10. So
It was extra badass.
Yeah, I just loved it from the get-go from that alone. But it checked off all the boxes for me. There wasn't too many bad things, too many bad situations in this film making that I didn't like about it.
It really reminded me of an 80s action movie in a very 90s setting. And so if you think about a movie like Predator, and then you take like all of kind of the movie making and the over the top and the crazy special effects and, you know, the fighting and everything else, and then you inject that into more of like the Dark City Matrix Crow type setting, this really does kind of seem to fit in that. And I think that one thing that's interesting to me about it is that the one person, like you were saying, is kind of the more superhero. It's almost like the inverse of Predator. Because it's not that there's one creature and a bunch of humans trying to stop it. It's there are a bunch of vampires and one human is trying to stop it. So it was kind of an interesting twist on that front. But it felt very consistent with me to, you know, the thing that we talked about before about like kind of that dark vibe of the late 90s. And I think The Crow kind of started it, and then Dark City continued it. You had this in the same year. And then once again, this is a movie that by going back to it, I'm like, oh, kind of seems like The Matrix borrowed a lot of things from this as far as visual aesthetics and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely like the dark concept, like just the overall darkness of the film itself was definitely just straight 90s for sure. You know, like, and I don't know why. I mean, we talked about that on, I think, one of our podcasts we had just done. It wasn't Fun and Games, but
I think it was the Dark City episode.
Well, that makes sense. And we just talked about it. I tried to dissect. I don't know why specifically, especially after editing it. It pissed me off what I was trying to say, but I liked it. Like, it was just grimy, you know. Some of the 90s movies just were grimy, and it was just nice to have. It wasn't so clear cut and crisp and clean. It was just, this is what we got, and we're just gonna do what we got with it.
And this one also, kind of along that same vein, had a little bit of the technology aspect to it, because Deacon was only able to decode the thing that the corporate vampires said can't be translated thing using a computer.
It's very, very true. And just so happened to have to be listening to techno music when it was going on too.
That's the only way computers will run, is if there's plenty of techno.
Yeah, I don't know if too many of our listeners are. Yeah, I don't know if too many of our listeners were born around this time, but that's exactly how computers worked in the 90s.
It was a different time. Office spaces were crazy.
It really did sound like modem connecting, you know, like the old modem connection with the fax sounding.
Dial-up.
Yeah. Dial-up, yeah, that's it. Yeah, it did sound like that.
Yeah. But yeah, this one, it was a fun movie. I think that if you liked The Crow, you will really like this movie.
Yeah.
And I feel like this one had a lot of just like deliberate badassery. Like, it really was going to make Blade like kind of that cool anti-hero. And one thing that stood out to me in the fighting was that, like, we've talked a lot this season about the emergence of computer generated special effects.
Yeah.
And in this one, they used them a lot, but they really doubled down on using them for vampire deaths.
Yeah.
And so it was interesting to me just the way that every vampire death was like highly stylized. And that was like a major component of what this movie was trying to do.
Yeah.
And that's kind of weird to me from a horror perspective, because that doesn't really support horror so much as it does just making Blade look extra badass.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of, I'm like, well, normally we talk about how they use special effects to, you know, handle the horror. And I guess to some extent, like, it was horrific the way they were dying, but it was also the people you were cheering against. So it wasn't quite as intense, I guess.
Well, and I was thinking about this when watching the film. So I felt like they used the CGI in the effect of the story itself. Because I know that in one of the scenes, they're like, well, where are they at now? Talking about a vampire that was killed, like they're gone. They were all disintegrated, whatever. And they start talking about his weapons. Which I I think is the thing. But what I was wondering about was, do you think that CGI, specifically in this film, do you think it was able to pass ratings because it had more of a CGI look on some of the blood?
Oh, interesting.
And then instead of doing it like say it was like Planet Terror like type blood deaths and everything, where pus is like literally like liquid that's like, is more of like a makeup special effect. I think that would have been worse than like kind of how they did it, but I don't know if that's why. I just was curious if that had something to do with it. Like it looked more cartoonish, so it was like, we'll let it pass. It looks like a cartoon.
Yeah, could have been.
Yeah. Who knows?
Yeah.
Hey, what's with vampires listening to techno music though? I'm not off this.
Well, I think it's just because that makes me not like them.
Oh.
They're like, oh, these are the bad guys. They're listening to that music you hate. And I'm like, damn straight they are. Get rid of them.
That was a legit realization where I was like, yeah, I think you're onto something there, because it just irritated me.
Yeah, I know. Not my jam.
I didn't have enough ecstasy in my system, I think, to enjoy that party.
Yeah. But I think that also definitely like seats this in the late 90s. The soundtrack on this one, we talked about last week with Ravenous, how like the soundtrack was just weird and the sound effects seemed out of place and everything. Mm-hmm. This one all felt just very, very 1998.
Yeah, this was this was like, hey, I got EDM like soundtrack, or what was it? Wow, this is EDM, or wow, this is techno tweet or whatever. And this is
now
like,
that's what I call techno.
Yeah, that's it. Now that's what I call techno. They just like placed all those. They're just like, just add them. Doesn't matter like what order. It's like, just add them.
Yeah. There were a few things about this movie that didn't quite connect for me. And
bite your tongue.
We've talked about this before, where sometimes it's almost like a detriment to the movie to take notes on it, because then you have to try and put sentences together that don't make sense. And so I had started writing, Frost is a young vampire entrepreneur who runs a series of vampire nightclubs, apparently. He thinks that the vampires should rule the humans, but the old vampire council wants to keep the order and honor the treaty with the humans. But apparently the vampires also control the police.
Yeah. Checks out.
Okay, just wanted to make sure I hadn't missed a plot point in there somewhere that connected those sentences more.
Yeah. No, that definitely checks out, because they mention it throughout this too, like 2 or 3 times. Like, you can't trust them. Like, they're embedded with them too. And I didn't understand if that meant Frost's crew was embedded with them, like if that's what he had been doing, and like that's because that's who was working for him in the scene where they were trying to get Karen in her apartment. I don't know, but it is definitely confusing. However, just like any other war treaty, people are going to cross lines, man.
Absolutely, they are.
Yeah,
like killing Whistler. When that happened, I was just like, Blade's about to wreck some shop.
Don't mess with Whistler, man. But hey, here's the thing with Whistler. He can take care of himself. Don't you worry. That's what I thought, just from the train scene alone.
I mean, he was outnumbered for sure. But
yeah,
have
you watched any of the sequels?
I have not.
Okay, then we're good.
Okay. But yeah, it was interesting though, because in his death scene, he was talking about Blade being like the chosen one and the Daywalker, and how Deacon actually needed him to complete his ritual somehow or something. And then he goes and they have like the big kind of epic showdown fight. And you're like, oh yeah, like Blade is clearly in control of the situation. but then his mom shows up, which was real unexpected for me. And also they seemed like there was some chemistry between that actor and that actress, and that should not have been the case given their relationship.
Yeah, no, and my man, I agree 100%. A couple things here. You saw Wesley Snipes in this. Listen, I got a wife.
He was cut.
I mean, he was jacked. Come on. The other thing is, like, there is like scientific proof out there that I don't want to go down that route. But there is scientific proof out there, like the laws of attraction. Like, it's a weird thing, man. I don't know. I probably saw it in one of my documentaries I watched, but yeah, that was like unnecessary. The attraction piece was unnecessary. I don't understand. I didn't get it.
I legit think that the actor and the actress were just like into each other.
They're just like, listen, we're about to bang this out. Or they were like out, like maybe they're at a techno party the night before. They didn't read the script. Yeah. And the director's not going to tell Wesley Snipes not to do something. So they're just like, just leave it.
Especially not while he's holding that sword.
Hell no. No, yeah, that was a little weird, a little unnecessary. I think the other thing I was thinking about, like you were talking about Whistler's death scene, and I think it was like right before that when Whistler was talking with Karen, but he was like, I took him in when he was 13, and I just feel like saying that in the 90s is something totally different than what we experience in 2024. Like if you see an old dude taking in that, you're like, whoa, what? That's a little strange, my man.
You got a little Batman-Robin relationship going on.
Yeah, kind of, it's like, whoa, that's sketchy. But back then it was like we weren't stupid. So we were just like understanding, like, yeah, he was taking him in to take care of him because he was a homeless kid. And like, not all dudes are weirdos. But yeah,
the dude was totally normal vampire hunter who knows about serum to fight off half vampire blood impulses, right. And machinist.
Well, you tell me you wouldn't do that if your whole family was killed by vampires. If you were killed by a vampire, you know what I would do? Well, if you were killed by a vampire, I would do what Whistler did. If you were only bitten by a vampire, I'd let you bite me because I'm just going down with you,
Well, it'd be like Ravenous all over again.
That's a good.
Just like, oh, well, now we're the hunters.
And I guess who has better business model than Frost? The Horrific.
That's true.
We pay for it all.
Yep.
Wait, what worse business?
Never know anybody anything.
I wonder if Frost is hiring.
I don't think he is now.
This movie though I also thought it had like examples of like humor. Like I don't think this is known as like horror comedy out there.
Oh no, not at all. Yeah.
But at the same time, I felt like this had better humor in it than like some of the horror comedies that we had seen. Just like even Blade cutting off that dude's hand, both arms, kind of thing. Yeah. It's just things like that were clever, I guess is the best way to put it. But they were also funny because of how it went down. But I think that kind of added to it as well. And every once in a while, man, we'll have these movies that come through, and it's just like they could do no wrong in certain aspects. And like in this aspect of like, oh, they were able to add some humor and some pretty gnarly fight scenes or, intense situational scenes that are happening.
And I think part of that is that it was, a higher budget movie. It had better actors, and it was just, they had a lot more to work with as far as the resources for making the movie. Mm-hmm. And that helps. Mm-hmm. And, we talked, what was the movie? Is it Sleepy Hollow, I guess, where we were talking about how just because it's kind of more of a Hollywood movie doesn't necessarily make it bad. Like sometimes there are a lot of benefits that come from having a crew of people who know, how to make a movie at a high level. Yeah, but also you don't necessarily have to have that to make a good movie, especially not a good horror movie. So, yeah. But yeah, and this one had some legit good scenes. I really liked the one where they were in the morgue and like the two doctors were standing there talking, like arguing about their relationship, and then the vampire corpse comes up off the table and attacks. And that was just so like sudden and intense and brutal that really caught my attention early and then made me pay more attention to what was happening afterwards.
Yeah. Thankfully they did that because no one wants to hear any couple argue about the relationship ever.
Every man would literally rather have that happen to him than have to continue that conversation.
That's a very good point. But you're absolutely right, because he bites and takes that doctor out, the male doctor out, and then he goes after Karen, and like she's running out, and like the way that she's running out with him attached to the neck, and she's like spinning, it's like almost in a way kind of saving her life. You kind of realize, he's probably not able to get as much because of how she's like spinning around like that, and like it was just little pieces like that was like, man, I think they did that on purpose, but if not, that was just like a lucky coincidence that kind of checks out for me. But that set, I mean, like he was burnt to a crisp. He jumps up and he has like really clean teeth, because he, I guess is a vampire maybe, but like, intense as it gets. And that was what the 2 minutes.
Yeah, that was early.
Right after it started.
Yeah.
Or I guess and 15 minutes.
And so then there was also the scene where Deacon is completing the ritual, and like those winged skeletons were coming out of the old vampires, and then Deacon turns into the blood god. And then at that point you're like, this guy was already pretty at the top of his game. Now it seems like he's really like big and unstoppable, and we don't know what the rules are anymore. And you kind of go from thinking that Blade is in control, or Blade is the one hunting them down, to Blade seems very defeatable at this point. And so you're kind of on that, like worried on his behalf. Kind of like when in that scene where the Crow, he realized that because the Crow was dead, he could take damage again. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I'm not invincible anymore. And now I'm in this fight situation where I could very realistically die. And then you start like worrying for the hero or the anti-hero. So this one followed kind of a lot of those same story beats, but it was just kind of a fun kill the vampires type movie, and I enjoyed it even though it wasn't that scary.
Yeah, like if this movie was a video game, it would be like beat 'em up style video game.
Right, yeah.
What I mean? And so like, it's pretty straightforward that you're getting action and vampires and blood and just all the above that you could expect from a horror film. This one just combines it all into one and has good acting with Chris Christopherson, Blade himself. There is a scene where Chris was giving Blade like the injection that Karen was like she was hiding and watching and like trying to figure out what was going on. And I was watching it and I got to thinking, like, I know that all Wesley Snipes was having to do was like act like it was hurting what he, the blood that he was getting, in his system. But like the way he did it, like he's kind of hunched over and then he kind of goes back and he comes back down, and like you could kind of see it like almost kind of release. And it was just like, he didn't say a word in that at all. It was literally just physical acting that he did. And it was like, it was believable, like that he was going through something super intense and going through the pain. It wasn't just him like holding tight and looking like intense at the screen or trying to be tough and like fight through it. Like he was just like, let's do this. And the way he went through the pain of that shot was just like, and this isn't like fanboy. This was just me like locked into a scene, I think, when that was going on. And I was just like, this is, I couldn't act. Like, that's why I couldn't act, because I couldn't do something like that. That's not why I couldn't act. I talk like this. But the reason why I couldn't act in that film was because I don't know how you could come up with that. Like, now lean your head back a little bit further and be more tense and then lean forward. I don't know. He's a natural.
That was the scene where I was like, man, that dude got ripped for this role.
Exactly. And the other reason why I support him is because he never paid taxes. So I support that. Wesley Snipes went to jail for tax evasion.
I don't know why, but that's kind of hilarious to me.
Well, the reason
You
why
imagine
I brought
him sitting at the dinner table, they're going around and it's like, man, what are you in for? And they get to him and he's like, man, I made a bunch of money. I didn't pay no taxes.
and I didn't pay no taxes.
What a badass.
Yeah. I think for me, I'm for it because we owe a lot of money this year. It's a thing. And so I don't know if you noticed, but multiple times in our conversation before this, I was against taxes.
Yeah. No, we had a very long conversation that it felt very anti-government, but now I guess in retrospect, it did feel more anti-tax specifically.
Yeah. Taxation without. Anyway. Yeah. Just a good film.
I stand with Wesley.
And then they pulled out the sunblock that you were like, oh, wait, would that actually kind of work? There were things that they were kind of adding to this, and killing the head vampire, by the sun, just
Yeah, there were some pretty gnarly death scenes.
Well, sure. Almost seemed like poetic because it was like you never get to see the sunrise because by the time it's getting up, like you got to get out, and it's that was intense. Yeah,
this one was fun. I mean, I can't call it scary, but it was a fun movie to watch, and I enjoyed it. And I think that it definitely leaves me with a bit more positive impression of 1998 horror film than I had before.
Yeah, I agree.
And that's what these next couple episodes are all about.
Yeah. So having fun, not paying taxes, and killing vampires.
If you ran on that platform, I'd vote for you twice.
And I'm all about stealing and cheating, so I would love 2 votes.
That's a third as many votes as you have Blade DVDs.
That's actually a good point. Yeah.
And that's it for today's episode. If you've listened this far, then thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed it. We're always looking for new ideas, so if you have any questions, comments, or movie suggestions, please send us an email at thehorrificpod@gmail.com or hit us up on the IG. That's what the kids call Instagram. Just search for The Horrific Podcast. Thanks for listening.
No, you cannot marry your cousin in Oklahoma. That's actually against the law. It's one of the few states. So quit asking.
I think you actually get tax breaks for doing it in Arkansas.
You'd actually be surprised by the amount of states that you can marry your first cousin in. I think California is one of them. I think that California made this joke up. That's a Southern thing to try to make Southern people look bad. But I'm saying that from Oklahoma. We don't even know what we are. Are we Midwest? Are we South?
I have many times referred to Oklahoma as Midwest and then been corrected by people for it. And I'm like, I'm from there though. So